Hello everybody, my name is Baptiste Cottier and I'm here to present you our paper Secure Decision Forest Evaluation. This paper has been co-written with Bettaieb, Loïc Bidoux, Olivier Blazy and David Pointcheval. The presentation will be divided in three parts. First, we will give some technical background, then we will present our contribution, and finally we will see some use cases of it. So first, let me introduce you the notion of decision tree and decision forest. A decision tree uses a succession of if nodes in order to classify a given sample. So each if node contains a comparison that is represented as a feature index and a threshold, such that for a given sample, which will be represented as a vector, the feature index will tell us which element of the sample to take, and if the comparison is true, the next node we will evaluate will be the left one, and if the comparison is false, the next node will be the right one. At one time, the next node will be a leaf node. If the label associated to this leaf is yes, then the label associated to the sample will be yes, otherwise the label associated to the sample will be no. Decision forest are set of decision tree. Then the final decision will be the label with the higher occurrences. Another technical background is homographic encryption. Additive homographic encryption allows the computation on encrypted data. More specifically, with two encrypted values A and B, additive homographic encryption can compute an encryption of A plus B without knowing A neither B. Also, given a scalar value k and an encryption of A, AHE can compute an encryption of k times A. But given an encryption of A and an encryption of B, additive homographic encryption cannot compute an encryption of A times B. From now, when a value will be written in white with a red background, it will be an additive homomorphic encryption of this value. There exist several analogous works on this topic. For the previous work, the client has private sample, the server has private model, and the client learned the outcome of the evaluation of the model on his samples, meaning he learned the class of his sample. But the server does not learn the outcome of the evaluation. All the previous works offer a three-step solution. The first step is the client that encrypts its data and sends it to the server. The second step is the server that evaluates blindly the model on the encrypted data, retrieving an encrypted label and then sending the label to the client. Last step is the client that decrypts the label and retrieves his data label. In our context, the client also has private samples. The server still gets a private model, but we want the server to learn the outcome of the protocol without the client learning the outcome. The three-step solution seen above is not available anymore, as in this context, this is the client that learns the outcome, while in our context, this is the server who have to learn the outcome. In our solution, we kind of swap the roles of the client and the server, as the server first encrypts its model and sends it to the client. The client blindly evaluates the model on its data. He then retrieves an encrypted label that he sends back to the server. Finally, the server decrypts the encrypted label received from the client and thus retrieves the label associated to the client's data. Before encrypting the model, we have to think what is the best way to represent it in order to optimize its encryption. Recall that we are in the case of binary decision trees, so there is only two possible labels, which are yes and no. Also, one can note that if a sample reaches label yes, it means that it reached either leaf 5, 7, or 8. Because we are in the context of binary decision trees, evaluating all the paths reaching leaves with label yes is the same as evaluating the whole tree. This is true because any sample that does not reach leaf 5, 7, or 8 necessarily reaches a leaf with label no. This is why we represent a tree with the set of all the branches leading to a leaf with the label yes. A strong point of this representation is that evaluating single paths is very easier than evaluating a whole tree in the cryptographic world. In this new representation of the tree, a node will contain a feature index I, a threshold T, and also an expected output E. The expected output E is here to tell if the next node of the branch would have been the left child or the right child in the tree representation. Now, given a T and an E, we set for each k in the set of the possible values the following table. If the output of the comparison of k with t is equal to E, then for the value k we set an encryption of 0. Otherwise, we set an encryption of 1. Now consider the two following examples. In the first case, we have t which is equal to 2 and e which is equal to true. Consider that k can be a value between 0 and 4. For all values of k that are smaller or equal to 2, we set an encryption of 0, and for all the other values, we set an encryption of 1. In the second example, we have t which is equal to 3 and e which is false. So for all values that are not smaller or equal to 4, we set an encryption of 0, and for all the values that are lower or equal to 3, we set an encryption of 1. Now consider the application with the branch leading to the leaf number 5. The first node, the node number 1, is expected to be true, and the second node, the node number 2, is expected to be false. We have the following cases. In the first case, the first comparison is true as expected, so we retrieve an encryption of 0, and the second encryption is true, but it was expected to be false, so we retrieve an encryption of 1. We homomorphically sum those values, getting an encryption of 1. In the second case, the first comparison is still true as expected, and the second is false also as expected. So both gonna be encryption of 0, and summing it homomorphically will give an encryption of 0. Next, if the first comparison is false and the second is true, both comparisons gonna be not as expected, and we will retrieve encryption of 1. Doing the sum still homomorphically will give an encryption of 2, and in the last case, the first comparison is false and the second one is false as expected, so the first encryption will be an encryption of 1 and the second one an encryption of 0. Doing the sum, we have an encryption of 1. Branch score leak information about the client data. For example, for the case number 3, we have the sum which is equal to 2. It means that both comparisons are false, and it reveals some information about the client data. In order to avoid this leak of data, we will multiply the final sum by a random value, which will make non-zero encryption random encryption, and encryption of 0 still will be encryption of 0. Now we can note that if a branch has a score of 0, it means that all the comparison has been as expected. Concretely, it means that in the tree representation of the model, the sample would have reached the leaf number 5. Otherwise, if the branch score is a random value, it means that at least one of the comparison is not as expected, and in the tree representation of the model, the sample would have not reached this leaf. Thanks to the randomization, no information about the amount of bad notes leaks. It means that no information about the comparison leaks and, by consequence, no information about the client data. The client will apply this protocol for each of the branches. For every branch, he will output either an encryption of a random value or an encryption of 0. Of course, the client does not know if it's an encryption of 0 or not. Then, the client will gather every output in a vector. If the client sent the vector in that form, it will leak information about its data. Concurrently, considering the second value of this vector, which is an encryption of 0, the server will decrypt it, see that there is an encryption of 0, and that all the comparisons of this branch are as expected. It leaks some information about the comparison and by consequence about the client data. This is why the client will permute the values before sending it to the server. When receiving a vector of encrypted value from the client, the server decrypts them one by one, and when a decryption leads to a 0, it increases the score of the client by 1, and if the final score of the client is higher than a given threshold, the final label is yes, and otherwise the final label is no. We can see that with this protocol, the server learns the outcome of the evaluation while the client does not. Also, none of the client or the server learns information about the other one's data. Let's talk about our protocol security. So first, in the context of a curious adversary that will follow the protocol but will try to learn more than it can with the data he receives. So no sensitive information about the service model leak if the adversary is the client, and no sensitive information about the client's data leaks if the adversary is the server. Secondly, consider the context of a malicious client. In this context, the client does not follow the protocol and do whatever he wants. In this context of security, our protocol is not secure anymore. But in our paper, with the help of oblivious transfers and Gabber secrets, we show that we can do an upgrade of the protocol to make it secure against malicious clients. All security details and proof can be found in the paper. We implement this protocol and use it on two use cases. The first one is the spam detection use case. In this context, the client has a ready-to-send emails and the server has a private spam detection model. The server can tell if mail is spam or not without knowing the content of the mail, and also without telling the client if its mail was detected as spam or not. This avoids the client to adapt its behavior in order to increase his next chances to pass the spam detection. Accuracy has been computed depending on three different parameters. First, T, which is the amount of trees, delta, which is the max depth of the branches, and gamma. Gamma is what we call the acceptation threshold. Concretely, if the proportion of trees returning that the mail is a spam is higher than gamma, then the mail is detected as spam. Otherwise, it is detected as no spam. The parameter gamma allows a trade-off between the false positive weights and the false negative weight. The second use case is the one that motivated this work. This is about continuous authentication. Continuous authentication allows to seamlessly authenticate an user which is on his mobile phone. The authentication uses some feature as the pressure on the screen or the moves by the finger to authenticate the user. Authentication model encryption are stored on the mobile phone, and continuously the client authenticates itself or not depending on the result of the evaluation. As in cryptography we only work with discrete values, we had to normalize the database. We chose a normalization of size 6 bits. Choosing 6 bits offers a good trade-off between the bandwidth and the accuracy. With those parameters, we see that our accuracy is around 90%. As we are in a continuous context, we can gather several authentication to decrease the false negative rate. Thanks for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any question, you can contact me at the address that you can see on the slide. Have a nice day. Goodbye.